Her ex-husband kept mocking her in front of her friends, until fate turned the tables. Samantha adjusted the collar of her plain blouse and looked at her reflection in the mirror. It had been a while since she was last invited to a formal dinner, and this one came from an old mutual friend of hers and her ex-husband, Philip. The occasion was a reunion of sorts, former colleagues, friends from their old neighborhood, and people who had once surrounded her during her married years. She debated declining the invitation, but something inside her urged her to go. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a small hope of reconnecting. She chose the most modest dress she owned and told herself that tonight, she would hold her head high. The restaurant was lavish, more elegant than she remembered. Crystal glasses clinked, silverware gleamed under soft chandeliers, and familiar faces smiled as she entered. But the warmth quickly faded when she saw Philip standing in the center, surrounded by laughter, telling stories animatedly. When he spotted her, his expression changed subtly, not with hostility, but with amusement, like someone seeing a ghost from a past they no longer feared. He gestured for her to come over. Well, if it isn't Samantha. Didn't expect you'd make it, he said, loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. His voice was drenched in irony, and a few people chuckled nervously. She smiled faintly and took her seat, bracing herself. As the evening unfolded, the conversations became a stage for Philip to perform. "You know," he began, casually resting his arm on the back of the chair beside him, "when we were married, Samantha used to say she wanted to start something of her own. A boutique, or was it a charity?" He smirked as some guests leaned in. But we both knew she wasn't cut out for it. She could barely keep track of the groceries, let alone run a business. The laughter that followed was light, polite, and scattered, but it echoed loudly in Samantha's ears. She clenched her napkin under the table and swallowed her pride, knowing that any reaction would only amuse him more. Philip wasn't finished. "I mean, look at her, still has that same look. Sweet, simple, soft-spoken. I guess some people never change." He raised his wine glass, toasting the air in her direction. "No offense, Sam. You're still great company for a quiet evening. Just not built for anything demanding." His new fiancée, a glamorous woman with gleaming bracelets and a tight designer dress, joined in with a laugh. "She's a housewife at heart, I guess," she said, without even looking at Samantha. Samantha tried to smile politely, her face burning with humiliation. Her hands trembled slightly under the table, but no one noticed. Or worse, they noticed and said nothing. Samantha excused herself briefly and made her way to the restroom, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she fought to keep her composure. Inside, she locked the door and let herself breathe. She stared at her reflection, familiar but weary. She had never regretted being a stay-at-home wife during her marriage. She had poured her energy into their home, supported Philip's career with unwavering loyalty, and had always hoped that, one day, he would see the value in her quiet sacrifices. That day never came. And now, those shared years were nothing more than a punchline to his jokes. She wiped her eyes quickly and returned to the table. The rest of the dinner was a blur of forced smiles and shallow small talk. A few of her old friends approached her, but the warmth was gone from their greetings. There was awkwardness in their eyes, and when Philip called out yet another joke at her expense, none of them defended her. One even laughed and whispered to her, "Don't take it so seriously. You know how he is." Samantha nodded but felt something shift deep inside. These were people who had seen her at her best and worst, people who knew the reality of her marriage. Yet, they all let it happen. That night, as she walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, something within her broke, and at the same time, something new was born. 3 years earlier, Samantha had signed the divorce papers with shaking hands. She had spent nearly a decade married to Philip, and though the first few years were filled with hope and tenderness, things began to erode slowly. He grew distant, more absorbed in his work and his public image. He started criticizing the little things, her clothes, her cooking, her lack of ambition, all masked as playful teasing. But over time, his words stopped being playful. They became cutting, calculated, and constant. By the end, she felt more like a burden than a partner, and when he asked for a divorce, he did so without even meeting her eyes. The settlement was generous, at least on paper. She received a small apartment and a monthly allowance for a year. Philip had insisted on no spousal support after that, stating she should learn to stand on her own. The lawyer advised her to fight, to demand more, but Samantha didn't have the energy. She just wanted peace. Those first months were filled with silence, no children to care for, no job to report to, no one to call her name. She tried to build a new routine, morning walks, library visits, learning how to cook for one. But each night she sat alone, hearing the echo of Philip's final words, "You'll see, you need me more than I ever needed you." Samantha's apartment was small, but it had a large window that bathed the living room in morning light. She grew fond of that window. It was where she drank her coffee each morning and watched the city stir to life. She didn't have much to do in the beginning, no career to return to, no friends left who weren't more his than hers. But as the days passed, she began volunteering at the community library, simply organizing books and helping children find stories to take home. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave her a sense of belonging again. The children smiled at her without judgment. They didn't care who she used to be. One day, as she helped an older woman set up an email account, the woman smiled and said, "You're very good at explaining things. You should teach or consult or something." Samantha laughed softly, brushing off the compliment. But it stayed with her. That night, sitting at her window, she thought, maybe I could do something more. Not to prove Philip wrong, but to prove to herself that the woman he tried to erase was still alive inside her. She opened her laptop and began to explore free courses online. She knew she wasn't ready yet, but maybe she could be. Maybe, for once, she could build something that was truly hers. Samantha's search for free courses became a quiet obsession. She spent hours at night, sitting at her small kitchen table with a second-hand laptop, immersing herself in marketing, digital strategy, and small business development. It didn't come easily. Her last formal education had been 2 decades ago, but every concept she grasped felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. She began keeping notebooks filled with ideas, scribbled diagrams, and highlighted quotes that inspired her. The library's computers became her study lab, and the volunteers there her silent witnesses. Her world, once so small and gray, slowly started to bloom in muted colors again. Then, one afternoon, as she was shelving books, a young woman named Alina, one of the library's interns, noticed the notes on her table. "This looks like a business plan," she said with a half-smile. Samantha blushed and tried to cover it up, but Alina pressed gently. "You know, I have a friend who's in a startup incubator. They mentor people who want to launch businesses. You should pitch this." Samantha laughed nervously, brushing it off, but inside, something clicked. She hadn't even thought of her scribbles as real yet. But that night, she opened a new page in her notebook and wrote 3 words at the top, "Why not me?" Alina introduced Samantha to her friend, Derek, who ran an early-stage support program for entrepreneurs. The meeting was informal, over coffee in a small co-working space. Samantha came in with trembling hands and a folder of handwritten pages, but once she started explaining her vision, an app that connected local artisans to logistics and buyers, her words gained confidence. Derek listened intently, asked a few questions, then nodded. "It's raw," he said, "but there's something here. You think differently. We're so used to tech types who forget about people. You're building from the other end." That comment stayed with her for weeks. She was accepted into the program, albeit as a special case. She wasn't like the others, young, polished, tech-savvy, but she brought something they didn't: empathy, patience, and an instinct for how people interact with services. While others talked about scaling and market penetration, Samantha focused on how to make a small business owner feel empowered using her tools. Her mentors started to notice. "You think like someone who's been through things," one of them said during a workshop. Samantha smiled, though her heart ached. She had indeed been through things. And maybe, for the first time, it wasn't just a wound, it was a gift. Every day was a lesson, and every lesson came with doubt. Samantha had never opened a spreadsheet in her marriage, had never negotiated, or spoken in front of a group, but now she was doing all of that and more. Her first financial projections were a disaster. She stayed up all night fixing formulas and crying in frustration, only to have them rejected again the next day. But instead of quitting, she asked questions. She attended extra sessions. She even stayed late to watch YouTube videos on basic accounting. Little by little, the numbers stopped scaring her. They became part of the picture, not the enemy. The deeper she went, the clearer her idea became. She didn't want just a business, she wanted to build a bridge. She remembered all the women from her old neighborhood, all the quiet talents that stayed buried because no one ever offered them a way out. Her platform would offer that. It would start small, handmade goods, local delivery, but one day, it could be a lifeline for someone else. Just like this opportunity had been for her. Her classmates in the program started to seek her input. "Samantha," they'd ask, "how would you approach this kind of customer?" It surprised her every time. She was no longer invisible. Despite her growing confidence, money was still tight. Her monthly divorce allowance had ended, and savings were nearly gone. So she took on side jobs, weekend shifts at a bakery, evening babysitting, and freelance transcription gigs. Her days started before sunrise and ended long after midnight. But she kept showing up at the incubator every morning, dressed simply but neatly, carrying a thermos of tea and the same worn notebook. She didn't complain. She had known exhaustion before: emotional, marital, soul-deep fatigue. This exhaustion was different. It had purpose. There were moments she thought of quitting, especially when bills piled up or when she caught a cold and couldn't afford to miss any job or class. But she would remind herself of the laughter at that dinner, of the way Philip looked at her like a discarded trinket. She refused to remain a footnote in his narrative. Every time she opened her laptop or mailed a progress report to her mentor, she felt one step further from that powerless version of herself. Her struggle wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't fast, but it was hers, and that gave it meaning. Months later, Samantha attended another event, this one hosted by a non-profit that supported women in entrepreneurship. She didn't expect Philip to be there, but as fate would have it, he was standing near the bar, his arm around the waist of his new fiancée, their laughter echoing in the hall. When he saw Samantha across the room, his eyes lit up with mischief. He crossed the space quickly and said with a smirk, "Samantha? Didn't think they let housewives into events like this." He gestured toward the table of founders. "Careful, You might spill tea on someone's pitch deck. She smiled politely and replied, I'm actually here presenting tomorrow. Philip blinked, then chuckled. Oh. What's it called? Tupperware Tales? His fiancée burst into laughter beside him. She's still playing at being a CEO, she muttered. Samantha simply turned back to her drink, refusing to let the heat rise to her cheeks. She wasn't the same woman he used to control. Let them laugh. She would speak tomorrow, not to prove them wrong, but because she believed in what she built. And the difference now was that she no longer needed their validation to believe in herself. The grand ballroom shimmered with golden chandeliers as Samantha stepped inside, the heels she had borrowed clicking softly against the polished floor. She had been invited by one of her mentors to a regional entrepreneurs summit, where small business founders and investors gathered to network. She didn't expect to know anyone there. Her heart pounded with quiet pride. This was a new world for her, one she had entered through persistence, not privilege. But her composure faltered the moment she caught sight of Philip across the room, laughing loudly as he clinked glasses with a group of executives. She considered leaving, but a voice inside her said no. She hadn't come this far to disappear again. Taking a deep breath, she made her way to the networking area. It didn't take long for Philip to notice her. He crossed the room with a grin that seemed carved from old arrogance. Samantha? Twice in a month? You really are following me around, he joked, loud enough for a few heads to turn. Let me guess, you're here for the free wine and name tags? She held her ground, offering a calm nod. I'm here to pitch, she said simply. His laughter was sharp. You? What on earth could you possibly be pitching? Samantha watched as Philip's amusement turned to open mockery. You were never the entrepreneurial type, he scoffed. You used to struggle with online shopping, and now you're building tech platforms? His fiancée, hovering nearby in a sleek red dress, raised an eyebrow and joined in. I guess now anyone can call themselves a CEO. All it takes is a Canva logo and a little imagination. The surrounding group chuckled. Some of the faces were familiar, people who had once shared dinners in her home, now looking at her as though she were a curious case. I'm glad you're keeping busy, Philip added, swirling the wine in his glass. But try not to embarrass yourself tomorrow. Investors can smell desperation. His words stung, not because she believed them, but because part of her still carried the scars he left. Yet, she didn't flinch. Thank you for the advice, she said softly. I'll make sure not to take up too much space at your event. She turned and walked away, head held high. The laughter faded behind her, but the burn remained. She knew now, he hadn't changed, but she had. The next morning, Samantha stood near the registration desk, organizing her notes and trying to steady her breath. She wore a pale blue blouse tucked into navy trousers, modest, but professional. Her hair was tied back neatly, and she had rehearsed her pitch so many times that it had taken over her dreams. Just as she was preparing to head to her presentation room, Philip and his fiancée walked by. The woman glanced her way and smirked. Oh, you're still here? I thought the kitchen help came early and left before the speakers arrived. Philip chuckled, not bothering to mask his condescension. She's got a big day, remember? There's a room full of venture capitalists just waiting to fund. What was it again? Crafts and candles? His fiancée laughed again. Well, best of luck. Hopefully, you don't trip on the stage or cry in the middle of it. Samantha clenched her jaw but said nothing. She had spent too long letting their words shape her sense of worth. Today, she would speak for herself, not for their approval. She walked away from them with measured grace, carrying a quiet storm in her chest. Just moments before the pitch event began, Samantha made her way through the tightly packed hallway outside the main auditorium. The scent of coffee and perfume hung in the air, and chatter echoed from every corner. As she passed a table with refreshments, someone bumped into her hard, too hard to be an accident. Her cup of tea splashed across her blouse, the pale fabric soaking quickly. A few gasps followed, then laughter. She looked up and saw Philip standing nearby, suppressing a grin. "Oh dear," his fiancée said with mock concern. "That's unfortunate. Should have gone with a darker color, it hides nervous spills better." Laughter rippled through the group gathered at the table. Samantha's heart pounded as she fought the urge to run. But instead, she took a napkin, dabbed her shirt, and smiled. "Thankfully," she said, voice steady, "I'm not here to be looked at. I'm here to be heard." And with that, she walked straight into the auditorium, her chin lifted higher than ever. She had no backup outfit, no stylist, and no applause waiting. Only her voice, and it would have to be enough. The pitch went smoothly, technically, at least. Samantha presented her concept clearly, answered questions with grace, and held her ground when a skeptical investor questioned her lack of background. But afterward, she overheard two attendees whispering, "She's got heart, but no real traction. She won't last in this space." Their words, along with everything from the past 24 hours, piled up like bricks on her chest. By the time she stepped out into the cold evening air, the tears were already slipping down her cheeks. She didn't care who saw. She called a cab and slid into the back seat, eyes glassy. The driver, a middle-aged man with graying hair and warm eyes, glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Tough day?" he asked gently. She nodded but said nothing. After a pause, he added, "You know, I drive a lot of people from these events. Fancy suits, loud voices. Most of them are bluffing. But the quiet ones, the ones who come out with tired eyes and no fake smile, they're the real deal. They're the ones who build something real." Samantha stared at his reflection, stunned. "Thank you," she whispered. And for the first time that day, she believed it. Long before marriage, business plans, or humiliating encounters, Samantha had been a quiet but resilient child. Raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs, she learned early how to be resourceful. Their home was small, their meals simple, but love and dignity filled every corner. Her mother used to say, "Strength isn't loud, Sam. It's what you do when no one's watching." That phrase stayed with her. She remembered watching her mother mend clothes at night while reading job ads, smiling through fatigue. That quiet endurance, that grace under pressure, was etched deep into Samantha's being, only buried for years beneath someone else's shadow. Those memories returned to her that night after the summit. Wrapped in a blanket at her kitchen table, sipping reheated soup, she thought not about Philip or his insults, but about her mother's calloused hands and tired eyes that never lost their spark. Samantha realized that she was made of something more than disappointment. She was not broken, only paused. Her failure to impress a few wealthy strangers didn't define her worth. She had something deeper now, something earned. That next morning, she got up early, opened her laptop, and reviewed every piece of feedback from the investors. If they doubted her traction, she would build it. If they didn't see her, she would make herself visible. Determined to gain momentum, Samantha applied to a national-level incubator known for investing in underrepresented founders. The application was grueling, with rounds of video interviews, concept validation, and business model reviews. She worked on her deck until her eyes stung, rewriting every slide with precision. When she received the email inviting her to the final pitch, she gasped aloud, barely believing it. This wasn't a token program or a local initiative, it was competitive, and the stakes were high. She traveled out of state on a budget airline, carrying all her materials in a single tote bag, her nerves coiled like springs. The panel of evaluators was tough. They asked difficult, technical questions and challenged her margins, delivery systems, and scalability. But Samantha had prepared. She stood straight, answered clearly, and when one judge questioned her experience, she didn't flinch. I didn't go to business school. But I've worked 15-hour days, managed homes with no income, and built this platform from the ground up with nothing but belief. I know my users, because I've been one of them. There was a long silence, and then a nod from the lead evaluator. You're in, he said. She didn't cry until she reached the hotel bathroom, where she let the quiet triumph wash over her. After the news of her acceptance into the program, Samantha posted a simple thank you note on her barely used social media account. She didn't expect much. But that night, her inbox lit up with a message she hadn't seen in years, Carmen, her best friend from college. They had drifted apart during her marriage, lost in the fog of housewife routines and isolation. Carmen's message was short but powerful. I saw your pitch clip. You've become someone extraordinary. How can I help? Samantha stared at the screen, stunned. It felt like a bridge to another life, suddenly rebuilt with a single line of text. They met the following weekend in a quiet cafe. Carmen was now a project manager at a mid-sized logistics firm, and she listened intently as Samantha explained her platform. You need a test client, Carmen said. I'll connect you with a few local businesses we serve, see how your system performs in real life. That connection changed everything. With real users on board, Samantha finally had data, metrics she could present, not just vision. It legitimized her project in the eyes of investors. More importantly, it reminded her that she wasn't alone. The world hadn't forgotten her. She had simply needed to reappear in it. Confident in her growth, Samantha applied for a small business loan to fund her platform's development. But her lack of assets and limited income history raised red flags. The bank officer, polite but dismissive, handed her a rejection notice. Try again when you have a co-signer, he said. The door closed behind her like a slap. She walked home in silence, the crisp envelope crumpled in her hand. Back in her apartment, she paced the living room, anger and doubt rising. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize. Samantha? It's Helen. I don't know if you remember me. Samantha remembered instantly. Helen had been a young mother at the library years ago, frazzled and overwhelmed. Samantha had helped her set up a resume and register for job alerts. I saw your name on the local paper's feature about women entrepreneurs, Helen said. You helped me when I had nothing. I've got a small inheritance and no idea what to do with it. If you're looking for a partner, I'd love to invest. Samantha stared at the screen, speechless. Life had come full circle, not through power or status, but through kindness once offered with no expectation of return. With Helen's seed funding and Carmen's logistics support, Samantha finally launched the full version of her platform, Local Loop, a system that connected independent creators with real-time delivery routes and customizable storefronts. Within weeks, small businesses began signing up. Reviews poured in praising its simplicity and human-centered design. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. And for the users, many of whom had felt left out by big platforms, it felt like a home. Samantha spent her days balancing product development, customer support, and interviews with curious journalists. For the first time, people called her founder with sincerity. She still lived in the same apartment, still rode the bus most days, but her inbox was full of partnership requests, her dashboard showed upward trends, and her voice was being heard in rooms where, once, she wouldn't have even been admitted. But more than the external change, there was a shift inside her. She no longer rehearsed what she'd say to Philip if she saw him. She no longer needed to prove him wrong. Her success wasn't revenge. It was freedom. And freedom, she now knew, was the most powerful answer of all. 2 months after the launch, Samantha received an invitation from the procurement team of a well-known retail chain. They were searching for a logistics partner with flexibility to support small-scale producers across the region. Her platform, Local Loop, was already gaining praise for its tailored routes and community focus. After multiple meetings and a live demo, they signed a pilot contract. The deal included absorbing a smaller local logistics firm into her structure, one that happened to be Philip's company's exclusive supplier for niche packaging. The irony wasn't lost on her when she saw the name in the acquisition brief. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. This wasn't about revenge. It was business. Yet, part of her knew that the boardrooms were about to overlap. She handled the paperwork professionally, never mentioning the connection to anyone. A week later, her team received a transfer of accounts, and among them sat one that bore Philip's company letterhead. She stared at it for a long moment, then filed it away with the others. The past was now part of her operating structure, controlled, processed, and no longer emotionally charged. At least, that's what she told herself. Philip's office was filled with tension. His operations team informed him that their long-term packaging partner had been acquired by a newer tech logistics firm and that all current vendor contracts would be reevaluated. He scoffed at first. "We've been with them for years," he said. "They won't drop us." But within days, they received formal notice: their service agreement would not be renewed. He called the new firm's number listed on the letterhead but was rerouted to a polite customer liaison who said the decision was based on alignment and restructuring. "No exceptions," she added firmly. Frustrated, Philip paced the room. His new packaging team had delays, and clients were already complaining. "Who the hell are these people?" he muttered, staring at the name of the firm, Local Loop. The name rang a bell, vaguely, but he couldn't place it. "Probably some overfunded startup run by interns," he scoffed. His fiancée agreed. "You should teach them a lesson. Let them know who they're messing with." But that night, as he researched the company, something about the founder's name made him pause. Samantha Nolan. It couldn't be. Could it? 3 days later, Philip scheduled a meeting with Local Loop's partnership division. He wanted the contract reinstated, and he wanted answers. He arrived at their downtown office, dressed in a sharp navy suit, practiced charm ready. At the front desk, he smiled broadly. "Philip Ternan, here to see the COO." The receptionist nodded. "Of course. Please wait in conference room 2. What Philip didn't know was that Samantha, who had just returned from a meeting across town, was seated quietly in the adjacent room, finalizing budget approvals for the same division he was requesting to meet. From her glass-walled office, she saw his familiar figure walk in. Her heart paused, but her expression didn't change. She turned back to her screen, breathing evenly. Her assistant entered quietly, handing her the revised schedule. "Mr. Ternan is asking for a direct meeting." Should I transfer it to you? Samantha didn't look up. No. Let the team handle it. She stood up and walked to the far end of the floor, out of his line of sight. She didn't need to confront him. Her presence in that building, her name on every document, every strategy, they spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. 2 weeks later, Local Loop announced a new funding round. The lead investor arranged a showcase event to present the leadership team and highlight their expansion roadmap. Samantha arrived early, dressed in a simple charcoal suit, her hair tied in a soft knot. As she reviewed the speaking order with her team, she heard murmurs near the elevator. Philip had arrived. Uninvited, of course, but his fiancée had leveraged her family's minor investment link to secure attendance. Philip wasn't there to support, he was there to assess, to undermine if he could. When the room quieted and the host introduced the founders, Samantha stepped onto the platform with measured confidence. The screen behind her lit up with the Local Loop journey, its growth, values, and reach. Philip's eyes widened as he connected the name with the woman he had mocked so often. There was no mistaking it now. His jaw tightened. His fiancée leaned toward him and whispered, "That's her?" He didn't answer. Samantha didn't look his way. She spoke clearly, focusing on the audience. But one sentence stood out: sometimes, the best ideas come from those no one expected anything from. After the presentation, the room erupted in applause. Several reporters rushed to speak to Samantha, while investors and partners lined up to shake her hand. Philip stood frozen near the back, gripping his glass too tightly. He turned to his fiancée, his voice low and stunned. "She's not just part of it, she runs it." His fiancée, equally shaken, looked at the stage in disbelief. She was mocked out of a dinner. You said she was living on scraps. Philip couldn't answer. His version of Samantha had just evaporated, replaced by someone he no longer recognized. He stepped out of the room, heart pounding, unsure whether it was pride or shame pulsing in his chest. He had spent years laughing at her, dismissing her, believing he'd never see her rise. And now, here she was, elevated, respected, and surrounded by the kind of people who wouldn't have returned his calls last week. Outside the glass doors, he paused. Should he go back in and congratulate her? Apologize? Or would it be worse to be ignored? He didn't know. For the first time in years, Philip had no idea what to say. Later that week, a formal meeting was arranged between Local Loop and several corporate partners, one of which still included Philip's company, though now as a client, not an equal. Samantha was asked to lead the discussion. When she entered the boardroom, Philip was already seated, flipping through a proposal packet with an agitated expression. He didn't look up immediately. But when her heels tapped across the floor and she took her place at the head of the table, he finally raised his eyes and froze. His hands stopped mid-page, and his mouth opened slightly. "Good morning," she began, voice calm. "Thank you all for being here. My name is Samantha Nolan. I'm the founder and CEO of Local Loop." She paused just enough to let the words land. "Today, we'll be discussing revised terms for our delivery partnerships, including minimum accountability standards." The room nodded in attention. Philip sat stunned, caught between disbelief and a desperate attempt to compose himself. "Wait. Samantha," he stammered. "You're the CEO?" She offered a brief, professional smile. "That's correct. And today, you're here as a client. So let's proceed." The tension in the room was sharp. Philip, for once, had nothing to say. He looked around, hoping someone might smirk or scoff, but no one did. The executives present treated Samantha with complete authority. His fiancée, seated beside him as an observer, leaned close and whispered, "You didn't say she was all this." He avoided her gaze. Her voice dropped again, sharper now, "You laughed at her." In front of everyone. The realization hit her harder than expected. She suddenly felt exposed, embarrassed by proximity. Samantha continued, unfazed. She presented her case clearly, outlined her expectations for the partnerships, and never once acknowledged Philip beyond what the meeting required. That, in itself, spoke volumes. The room listened. Her words carried weight not because she was loud, but because she was earned. When the meeting ended, people lined up to shake her hand. Philip lingered behind, waiting. Finally, when the room emptied, he stepped forward. "Sam, I didn't realize." She didn't flinch. "No, you didn't. But I always knew." Philip followed her out of the boardroom, visibly rattled. "Listen," he began, "about the past. I was immature. I didn't know you had it in you." Samantha stopped near the elevator, turning to face him. Her eyes were clear, her expression neutral. "I always had it in me," she said. "You just never looked beyond what you wanted me to be." He shifted uncomfortably, his voice lower. "I didn't mean to humiliate you. I thought I was being funny. It was just the way things were between us." Samantha tilted her head slightly, thoughtful. "You made me feel invisible. Not because I was small, but because you couldn't imagine me being anything more than what was convenient for you." She wasn't angry, not anymore. She had passed that point long ago. "You don't owe me anything," she added. "But I hope someday you understand that strength doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes, it grows in silence." Philip stood there, speechless, watching as the elevator doors closed between them. Months later, Local Loop expanded into 3 new cities, partnering with artisan networks and micro-businesses. Samantha, now a respected speaker at business panels, was asked to mentor younger founders. One afternoon, a nervous young woman approached her after a conference. "I've never done this before," she said, holding her pitch materials tightly. "I just got divorced. Everyone says I'm wasting my time trying." Samantha smiled warmly and sat with her. "Tell me your idea," she said. "Let's start there." That hour turned into a long coffee, then weekly check-ins. Samantha recognized the woman's uncertainty, the tired eyes and soft resilience. She had seen it before, in her own mirror. Helping her didn't feel like charity. It felt like duty. No one had handed her a shortcut, but someone, somewhere, had given her a chance to believe in herself again. Now, it was her turn. The cycle of kindness, of quiet empowerment, had begun again, one voice, one idea at a time. Samantha's apartment remained modest, though she could now afford something much larger. Her days were busy, but every evening she returned home, watered the plant by her window, and sat with a cup of tea. She no longer thought about Philip often. When she did, it wasn't with anger. It was with distance. His words had once pierced her, but now they were just echoes of a story she no longer lived in. She had forgiven, not to free him, but to release herself from the weight of bitterness. She had learned to build boundaries, to defend her worth without apology. What she created wasn't just a company, it was a life rebuilt from ruins. She knew now that value wasn't something others gave. It was something reclaimed, piece by piece, through action, pain, and grace. And in that quiet space, with the city lights outside and the hum of a laptop cooling beside her, she smiled, not because she had one, but because she had become whole.